our program is exactly for that. So Jean Pierre is a very, very busy individual. So thank you very much again for being here. Today, hopefully within our 30 minutes time or so, we try to pick your brain in the banking industry. So Jean Pierre, welcome. And let me, if I may, maybe my first question to you is, could you give us a gist of what's going on in Cambodia at the moment in the banking industry? Do you see it as still growing, or is it being stagnated, or what? Your perspective. Thank you.
Well, the first thing is banking is required. As Cambodia transitioned to a very solid economy, if you don't have banking, you cannot inject money into the economy. So banking is playing a very crucial role into the economy because it makes capital available for people to do investments and to grow businesses. So if the banks don't lend, even if there's a bit of a downturn in the economy will not be able to navigate through that down cycle and prosper. So banking industry is very crucial to emerging economies.
Well said. So now you said it very, very quickly that even in economic downturn, banks still have to loan, right? The bank cannot stop lending because otherwise everything else might stop. But in your opinion, many years in the bank, previously you were elsewhere. Could you give us a quick comparison? I know that our country is still a young country, but we have so many banks compared to per capita. We have so many banks. Do you think that is healthy, or in your opinion, you would rather think maybe there are less banks, but or what?
Well, what you want in a banking system is not to have systemic risk, right? So although we have probably 63 commercial banks, probably 7 leasing organizations, 9 specialized banks, 83 microfinance, 104 rural microfinance. I think it's important because it gives different options to business people, to borrowers, and it allows to grow the market. Right now, I think Cambodia is well positioned. Youngest population in Southeast Asia, one of the only country that the demography is growing. We're adding 5 million people by 2050, which is an increase of about 30%. If you compare this to China with their one-child policy, they're losing 500 million people over a population of 1.5 million. So China will go through a transition that will be a lot tougher than the growth transition we're going through because the population is growing. So I think although the space is crowded, it gives more options. So I don't see why we should limit the entrance in the market. At one point, maybe you increase the capital adequacy ratio, the tier 1, tier 2 capital, but I don't think it's an issue. If you look in the market right now, under CBC, Credit Bureau Cambodia, total outstanding is roughly 50 billion. So it means that consumers have more or less $50 billion worth of loan in the country. 5 billion of that comes from microfinance. So you can see that still the bulk of the lending is done by the systemic bank.
Okay. I guess that pretty much summarized the whole idea. Yes, although we are having a lot of banks, but as Jean Pierre said, the population growth is very encouraging compared to other more developed countries. So that's a good sign. And this is why the more people, the better. The more people, the better. And it's even so when the more people with the more skills, right? And that's why you are here. Now, I don't want to monopolize the questions. I see that questions are numerous from students, and I hope those who ask questions are here. So how about that? Are you here? Where's Sahabate? Sahabate is here? Okay. Sahabate, can you ask your question number 3? Your question number 3, Batay. Let me rephrase. So the question is about what are the different considerations you have to entertain when you decide to give loan to different industrial segment, right? So retail is going to be different consideration. You lend to homeowners, is that going to be a different formula that you use? So what is your approach to lending to different sectors of the economy, basically?
So the first thing you need to understand is in Cambodia, there's a very fine line between individual and business. Out of the 760,000 businesses, 670,000 of them are less than 10 employees. 620,000 of them are less than 2 employees. So often, even if you underwrite a business loan, you will underwrite it like an individual loan.
Good point.
So that's number 1. Number 2, the key of lending is always the same. Ability to repay and willingness to repay. So what is ability to repay? Ability to repay is the cash flow that the business is generating to cover the loan.
That's right.
Right? So we talk about things like DSR, debt service ratio. So what is the cash flow available to cover the payment of the loan?
Right.
Right? So that's the ability to repay. So the ability to repay, you will establish it by looking at Credit Bureau Cambodia to get the K-score. You will look at financial banking statement. You will look at financials over 3 years. You will look at all those things to see if the cash flow is available to cover the loan.
Yeah.
Then you will look also at LTV. So you talk about industrial, real estate, and so on. So LTV is loan to value. So for instance, if I finance a building, let's say you want to finance this building. If it's a soft title or if it's a hard title, we will give a different valuation on the quality of the asset. Because we look at the value, the quality of the asset we're financing, right? So that's on the ability to repay, right? So the quality of the collateral, the quality of the cash flow, the quality of the project, and so on. Then you also need to look at willingness to repay. Because we have some people that are extremely wealthy, but if they don't want to repay you, you know it's going to be a chore and it's going to take forever to get your money. The bank is not in the business of acquiring collateral. The bank is in the business of generating income by charging interest on money. And it's the gap you do on the cost of borrowing and cost of lending that makes you money. So a bank is not in the business of seizing assets and liquidating assets. A bank is in the business of being repaid. So the willingness to repay is very important. So how do you decide on the willingness to repay? So you can look at, do they pay on time with utility bill? You can look at past loans if they were paying them on time. Now with AI, you can do quite a lot of things. So for instance, if I have your cookies and I see which website you're browsing, is very different to go on Yahoo Finance or reading Bloomberg versus reading Paris Match for the People Press, right? So now there are more and more new algorithms that allow you to judge of the person character for the willingness to repay. there's a great fintech that HSBC has invested in Singapore. With a recording of 30 seconds, they are able to predict up to 72% the willingness to repay of the borrower.
Wow, that's great. 72%.
72% accuracy.
Wow.
In any language.
Okay.
Khmer, English, it's incredible. So what can you do with this, right? So you can do three things. You can look at using this for hiring interview because you're able to judge the integrity of the character. Number two, you can use it for collection purpose. So the problem is, let's say I'm in a downturn and I have a borrower and he's asking for a bit of a break.
Okay.
Can you charge me interest only instead of principal and interest and so on? You enter into that negotiation with the best intent, right? You want to give them a bit of breathing room so they can get their business back on the right track. But you also have bad characters that they just want to evergreen their loan and they have no real intention to pay.
Okay.
The end is unavoidable, inevitable. So with this algorithm, you can judge the character. So if the person has the willingness to repay you, then yeah, I'm gonna give you a break, let's negotiate and find a sweet spot where we are both comfortable. But if the algorithm tells you they have no interest and willingness to repay, you can bring to collateral liquidation. That's a second opportunity. The third opportunity is for microloans, right? And in Cambodia, we have a bit of a country at two speed. We have the very urban Phnom Penh where you have most of the large businesses and large deposits. But you also have rural in the province where people need small loans to farm from an harvest to an harvest season, right? So those small loans, even if I check the ability to repay forever, the willingness to repay is more important. So you can digitize those loans very quickly and automate a lot of these things with the technology. So it's a very long answer to your question. But fundamentally, you look ability and willingness, and you have many ways to assess those things.
That's right, perfect. I guess students have read article on the 5 C's of checking credit history. So that's why now Jean Pierre only had time to do 2, the capacity, the first C, that ability to pay loan, and the character. That means whether in the past that person has proven to be a good repayer, right? So that's it. And now my next question comes from you. Can someone give her the mic, please? Please say your name too. Make it short.
Greeting Professor and guest speaker. My name is John Parinya. My question is based on what, when we apply the 5 CS of credit, can we anticipate that borrower will return the funds? That's all.
So I'm not sure I understand your question. So your question is how...
Even if you get the 5 C's correct, but do you still have other magical solution to make sure that that person will actually pay? You only touch upon willingness, but is there any other criterion that you might use?
No, so like I mentioned, right? So we will definitely look at the cash flow available to cover the loan, right? So the DSR, debt service ratio, is super important. So usually this is where the problem happens in the economy. Banks are probably tolerating a higher DSR during good times, but during bad time, they will ask for a smaller ratio.
Sure.
So this is where the credit crunch happens and the bank don't lend as easily. So this is what is so important in a downturn. You want the banks to keep lending. So to give you an example on how you can achieve this, the government here was very quick to create an entity called CGCC, right? Which is an insurance for banks. So you can buy an insurance. So if the borrower default on the loan, you can ratchet on that insurance and be indemnified.
Sure.
Right? But without being too technical, your 5 C's or ability, willingness, judging the character, the credit, the collateral, and all of that, this is proper to every bank, right? And the data is the new oil, right? The more data you have, the better off you are. What you do on your daily life today as students, you don't realize, but it becomes a predictor of your ability to borrow in the future. Just the way you store your pictures on your phone, just the website you're browsing and so on, will have an impact on how you can borrow in the future. In China, you probably heard about social scoring, right? So this restrict your travel, this restrict your school availability, this restrict your borrowing activity. But those 5 C's cannot prevent a downturn. So it's very important for a banker to own the loan they have given. So you need to assess the situation of the borrower, not just one time and you put it in the drawer and you walk away and you know you're going to be repaid. You need to take a genuine interest into the business of your consumer or your business, and you need to look at their performance. So you want to be on top of everything if problem arise. So an example of this is in a downturn, my collateral that was worth $1 million, in a downturn, maybe it worth 500,000.
Only half.
Right? So the quality of my collateral was probably covering more than the loan before. But maybe today it doesn't cover half of the loan. So sadly, sometimes you need to engage with your borrower and say, we're too much at risk, we're not meeting our criteria, please give me more collateral. So this is why banking is a bit complicated, because you need to assess the situation constantly. So if you look in banking, you will hear acronyms like PAR, Portfolio at Risk. You will hear RWA, Risk-Weighted Asset. What is the quality of your asset? You will hear things like CAR, Capital Adequacy Ratio. You will hear things like NPL, non-performing loan. In Cambodia, if a loan has not been paid for 90 days, it becomes NPL. So you have different categories. You will hear things like DPD, days past due, right? So 0 to 29 is normal. 30 to 60 is special mention. And then you go down like this. But at the same time, you need to create what we call an LLP, loan loss provision. And that loan loss provision has an impact straight in your P&L.
That's true.
But it also has an impact on your balance sheet. So again, judging your 5 C's or making sure that your 5 C's plus ABCD that you decide to use to underwrite a loan is super important, because the balance sheet of the bank will be impacted by your ability to manage those NPLs.
Perfect. Just on that point alone, NPL, all that. Yes, the 5 categories from normal to special mention, then substandard,
Right.
then doubtful, and then finally loss, right?
Yeah.
So for the loss category, you would have to provision 100%.
Correct.
But when do you take the tough decision to write off? When you feel like, well, okay, enough is enough. I'm not gonna spend any more time on my staff trying to recover that particular bit. Let's just forget it. We write off. What would have to happen before a banker finally say, we gotta write it off?
It's a very good question, and I will explain you the challenges but I'm not going to give you the answer or what we apply at the bank. Okay? But the problem, like you mentioned, if I take my loan loss provision of 100%, it means that my interest in suspense gone. So it has an impact on my income statement. My provision straight below my P&L. So again, it brings my profit down. On the balance sheet side, the loan loss provision reduces my asset, right? Remember that a bank is the contrary as a person. A person, an asset is a building, is money, is a car. A liability is a loan. But for a bank, it's the reverse. The loan is the asset and the cash is the liability. Because the cash you deposited at the bank, I owe it to you. The loan is my asset. So the problem is when I devalue my asset, then my capital adequacy ratio is different. Right? So the capital adequacy ratio in Cambodia, by memory, actually I wrote it here so I can tell you the exact figure. So the capital adequacy ratio minimum that you have is 15%. But also the bank usually they add a buffer on it.
Right.
And the regulator adds a buffer of 2.5% for conservation buffer. Because we're in a downturn, that buffer is not 2.5, it's 1.25. So it means that at all time, the minimum a bank can maintain is 16.25% of equity to the loan book.
Okay.
So essentially, you need to have 165 million for 1 billion.
Right, exactly. Yeah, okay, good. I know that we are getting so many questions, but I can do one more from the student side. Rachika? Rachika. All right. Rachika, can you, because I don't want to repeat the question, so can you ask your question number 3, Rachika? Question number 3.
Hello, everyone, Professor. How do interest rate structure and long-term vary in commercial real estate lending? And what factors influence the choice between fixed rate and variable rate loans?
Okay. So that's a very good question. So do everybody understands variable interest rate or ECOV versus fixed rate? So if you look like, sadly, we are a dollarized economy, right? So because we're a dollarized economy, there's a cost of fund, right? COF means cost of fund. So a bank puts a cost on any money it has. So what are the types of money a bank can get? It can get shareholder equity, right? The investment of the shareholder. So that's the cheapest cash because you pay 0 interest. It's the down payment that the investor put in the bank. Then you have CASA. What is CASA? CASA is your operating account and you barely make any interest on the money you put at the bank. So that's the second cheapest source of fund. Then you have term deposit.
Right.
Fixed term deposit. So I will pay you 5, 6, 7, 8% on the money you deposit at the bank. So that's expensive for the bank because it means that the cash I took, I have to pay you interest. So the money I will make when I lend it is my interest rate minus fees minus cost of funds. So it's expensive. Then you can do senior debt. A bank can borrow to lend. So there's also a cost of fund for that. And then there's the most expensive one, which is called sub-debt. So it's like quasi-equity that you borrow. So this one is the most expensive one. So usually bank, what they do, they will add up those 5 things And this become their cost of fund or fund transfer price, FTP, and they will look at the profitability of every loan versus that cost of fund. Short-term money, long-term money, and so on. But all of this is driven by the Fed rate in the US, right? So if the Fed rate is 5%, your cost of fund cannot be 0, right? So the Fed rate varies. So when you are on a variable rate, you will either peg over the Fed rate and add a few bips over this up and down. You will use LIBOR so far, or you will use ECOV, your own cost of fund, because it varies during the year. Sometimes you have more CASA, sometimes you have more term deposit. So the rate will be adjusted based on those elements. So in short, variable normally should be the cheapest, but also the riskiest.
Right.
Because as a borrower, if the interest rate goes up, your interest rate will go up. So you need to be able to stomach it. You need to be able to face it. Fixed rate, then you just fix it there. But for the bank, it's riskier because if I give you a mortgage over 20 years
Right.
at a fixed rate, it's very risky because the interest rate will go up and down.
Right. And that's, Jean-Pierre, what you have just explained to us, we learn more from your 20 minutes of conversation than reading from 2 books on banking. So wonderful, wonderful conversation. I wish I could keep you here forever, but I know that you're also tasked on time. So I will go to the final round of question. Now, without me looking at your question, anyone in here want to shout out? Anyone? Anyone want to ask a question? Now, one from the, who? Virak? Which one? Give me the name of your student. Okay, come on. Keep it.
Top scorer. Good student, very good student.
Good morning, honorable speaker. My question is, what are the risks associated with the construction loan for borrower and lender?
Construction,
construction.
right? Construction business? Okay, what are the major risks associated with lending to construction companies?
Many.
Let's just say 2 major ones.
Well, construction is you carry the risk of construction and you carry the risk of the promoter not selling the units. So you need to look at those 2 things, right? So construction will last 2-3 years. So you can have a certain volatility during this, right? So sometimes you will see, like during COVID, for instance, a lot of Chinese companies started to build, but during COVID, they left Cambodia and went back to China. Well, if you're the lender, you're stuck with a partially finished building. You don't find your borrower, and you need to liquidate that piece of asset, so it becomes very difficult. So during the construction, you have one risk, and after construction, if the units are not sold, you have that risk also. Or if it's a shopping mall, if you don't have tenants, the P&L that they presented to you doesn't materialize. So they cannot cover their loan. So this is where it gets risky. But in Cambodia, because I mentioned about the demography that is increasing, that real estate risk in theory should not be there as much because you will need apartments, you will need place to live. But then it becomes, do you want like a boré where you have a landed property versus a condo? So potentially different banks will see borés as less risky because it's a landed property versus a condo. Because the condo, even if they sold 50% of the units, they still need to maintain 100% of the building.
Okay, very good. So now let me close off this session with one final question so that students carry that with them. Everyone knows about the global recession that happened when I was back in Canada, right? 2007, I was still in Canada. So I was right in the heat. Then 2008 came, all of that. But most recently, Silicon Valley Bank and so many others, I think there were 5 of them failing altogether last year, right? Sometime around last year. And so government would have to bail them out, they bought them, all of that. So we call a crash in the particular bit of that place in the banking industry. Now for you, what would have to happen in Cambodian context? What would have to happen if a crash similar to what happened to Silicon Valley were to happen?
Well, the problem of Silicon Valley is completely different than some other banking problems. The problem is they had too much money. So remember what I explained you, money is a liability for a bank, it's not an asset. So if you have too much money and you cannot lend it fast enough, you need to buy monetary instruments. In the case of Silicon Valley, what they did is they bought government bonds that were long. But with technology today, if you want to empty your bank account at 10:04, you go on our mobile app, you transfer the money is gone. So what happened to Silicon Valley is an instant tsunami based on a rumor. And people emptied their bank account. So what happens is if the cash in the bank goes down, you cannot justify a big loan book. You need to shrink your loan book. So if it happens too quickly, you cannot balance your loan book with your cash. So that's what happened. So when I talked about capital adequacy ratio, this is what the regulator is really looking at. In a downturn, they will allow the bank to drop a bit the capital adequacy ratio, so they keep lending. But when the economy is good, they should increase the capital adequacy ratio. So the CAR is a very powerful tool for the regulator to de-risk the banking system. So we talked about the crowded space of banks and so on. So if the government would want to do a certain consolidation, the only thing they have to do is to increase the capital adequacy ratio, and some banks will no longer have the required capital, so it will induce consolidation. So we cannot prevent bank runs and that type of things. But if you look at the banking system in Cambodia, it's a lot stronger than in other countries. You don't realize how the central bank is advanced compared to other central banks. You don't yet appreciate at its right level the value of Bakong that enables you to send money to any bank, take money from any bank. In Europe, they had to legislate PSD2 regulation to do open banking. Here, if I ask you, can you send money to Asilida, to Satapana, to whoever? Yeah, no problem. You don't even appreciate it. So in other countries, they don't have this. So again, I think in Cambodia, we're fairly protected. I think the biggest challenge that we face is most of the collateral in Cambodia are land or property. Okay. So if the real estate market would devalue by 50%, it means the borrowers would have to give more collateral to the banks or would have to pay back their loan. Right. But when they liquidate their collateral, they don't get the expected value. So this would become a bit challenging. So things that the government has done that we talked about is bankruptcy law, right? So bankruptcy law will happen to liquidate those assets, and it will allow banks to get the bad loans out of their book quickly and allow them to lend again to start the economy again. So again, a long answer to your question, but I think we are in fairly good shape in Cambodia compared to other countries. But that's my personal opinion.
And I suppose you're right. So on that positive note, again, please, everyone, a round of applause to our guest, Jean Pierre Gagnon. Jean Pierre Gagnon, Deputy CEO of Satapana Bank, with so many years of in the bank industry. I think his combined years of experience already older than most of you. Okay, so the best teacher, apart from Varabot, is Jean Pierre. Why by that I mean when you study, do as much as you can in the class, right? But in the class isn't enough. You have to study outside of class on your own, which is why at here CamEd Business School, as chairman, I always connect you to the world. And speakers program that we usually do, interview program that we usually do, and so many other programs that we do, club activities, please join club student activities. All of that's gonna build you up. And internship that is now compulsory or has been for some time. So everyone must do internship in order to graduate, because that will give you the gist of real life, and you can't expect to go on to the world without first being exposed to it. So that's why at this school, we expose you to the knowledge, in-depth intelligence that can only come from real world practice, right? So connect the theory with the real practice, and that will make you better. And that will make you good, and that will make you love your life even better. On that note, again, thank you very much, Jean Pierre.